Thank you very much, Feli, for the opening. So, hello, everyone. We meet again in the discussion from Global Campus Asia Pacific, a Master of Human Rights and Democratization. So, today we will have discussion democracy at stake cases from Thailand and Indonesia. It's special for me because, like Feli said, that I am one of the alumni from MHRD and I used to stay in Thailand. So being a moderator in this discussion is like, it's like a reunion with me, with Ajahn Ben, who also my former supervisor. And then before we start our discussion, I'll give you short bio about our speaker. First, we will have Ajahn Ben or Bentara. I call her Ajahn because in Thailand we call our lecturer Ajahn. So, it's still hard for me to change the way I call her. Ajahn Ben is one of the lecturers at Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies in Mahidol University. And her expert is mainly about human rights, youth politics, and then social movement in Thailand. And then maybe if you guys are going to Thailand and went to Mahidol, you can meet her because she's always kind and helpful at the same time. Hi, Ajahn. Okay, for the second speaker, we have Mas Bayu. Mas Bayu Dardias Kurniadi, or he's one of my lecture when I was taking my undergraduate study. And then now we are partner or colleagues in Department of Politics and Government, Universitas Gadjah Mada. And then his research interests are mainly about aristocracy politics, governance, land politics, political economy, and public policy. So, it's also interesting because we invite Ajahn Ben and at Mas Bayu because we can see democracy from aristocracy cases from Thailand and Indonesia at the same time. But then, okay, I think that our short introduction. If you guys have a further question about our two speakers, please write down at the chat box you can Google it because you can find a lot of information since both of them are quite famous. Okay, okay, we start our discussion. At the first one, we will have presentation from Ajahn Ben. She will present about Thailand democracy nowadays. Okay, so please, Ajahn, take your time.
Thank you so much, Mahesh. It's such a pleasure for me to be here and now be your colleague and not your Ajahn or not your lecturer anymore. We have to remember that. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this session because I think that it's a very important issue to discuss today, especially in the context of many countries in our region who are facing similar situation of the rise of the authoritarian regime and also the rise of the conservative voice that support the authoritarian rule. And what I'm going to share with you today may be quite basic for many of you who may be familiar with the Thai politics, but I assume that not all of you are, so I will give a little bit background and also discuss the contemporary implication of authoritarian in Thai politics and update you on some of the current situation. Let me share my screen. I prepare a very short presentation, but because I hope that we can exchange or ask more questions at the end. Okay, and I also, okay. I name the presentation is very simple and straightforward: authoritarianism and human rights, and I would like to share the experiences from Thailand. And those of you who may have been to Bangkok may be familiar with this scene where it is in the Royal Palace and the Royal Ground near the very famous tourist place. And the photo was taken during one of the mass protests to demand for democracy in November 2020. And that's also an issue that I would like to discuss later. Okay. So I would deal with 2 or 3 issues today, not in like very rigid structure, but these are the topics that I would like to address. I would talk about authoritarianism in Thailand, what like the nature of it, and who are the key actors, or I call vehicles of authoritarianism in the contemporary situation, and a little bit of discussion on the situation under COVID and public emergency, because I think that's another situation that we are facing with when many states use the claim or the state of public emergency and the so-called the concern for national interest and public health as a means to limit freedom of expression and rights to assembly of many people in not only here in our region but around the world. I try to discuss what does this means on Thai human rights, and then what does it tell us about Thai democracy? We always think of democracy as a transition from authoritarian rule to a democratic one. But I think the experience we have in Thailand shows us that we may need to revisit that understanding. And it is not always this trajectory, but it's up and down, or maybe we never been through the real transition at all. I think that's something that we need to revisit. Okay, for those of you who may not be familiar with Thai politics, I prepared this just to give you a quick overview. Thailand was ruled by absolute monarchy in the past, and in 1932, this month, actually on 24th of June, 1932, there was a so-called Siamese revolution to turn the country from absolute monarchy to what we now call constitutional monarchy with the king as the head of the state. And that's a very interesting terminology that I would like to draw your attention to also. We are not just a constitutional democracy, but we are a constitutional democracy with king as the head of the state, which saw a certain level of compromise during the transition from an absolute monarchy to democracy. It has been, 90 years? Now, we are now in 2022. We have been like under 90 years of the so-called democracy. But as I said, it is not a smooth transition. There would be from 1932 to 1970s, Thailand was under military rule most of the time. In 1970s, there were 2 events of mass called the Movement for Democracy that met with violent crackdown by the state. And I think this is an experience that we share again with many countries in the region, that under the military rule or the authoritarian rule in the 1960s and 1970s, people started to demand for democracy. And in Indonesia, in the Philippines, we faced with the violent crackdown by the state. So in the 1970s, there were 2 important events where the authority cracked down on the democracy movement. The most important one is on 6 October 1976, where the massacre was carried out against the alleged communists And it was carried out not only by the state or the security forces, but also by civilians. Then I know that we can draw the parallel here with Indonesian case, although at a very much smaller degree when compared to what happened to you in 1965. Since then, there was a transition to democracy again. There was a huge political reform effort led by the civil society until we got what we call the People's Constitution in 1997. But we experienced democracy, democratic period, democracy environment, atmosphere for a very, very short time before the eruption of the political conflicts happened in around 2005, 2006. As you may have heard, the color politics, the yellow shirt, the red shirt, the former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra movement that happened in Thailand. The military that disappeared from Thailand since the latest coup they did in 1991 came back again and staged another military coup in September 2006. When the people protest against the maintenance, like the effort of the military to maintain its rule, and the effort of the military and the elites to undermine the elected government, they faced with another violent crackdown. And then another military coup, the latest one in May 2014. Thailand could be called a country of coup d'etat. We went through at least 13 success coup d'etat since 1932. Almost all of them were led by military that brought the country into authoritarian regime, either a short one or a sustained long period one. This is a photo from the 2006 military coup, and this one is a photo of the generals who staged the coup, and they came out, announced on the TV to tell the public that they took power in May 2014. Although we had election in March 2019, the general election, there was an effort by the military to I would say we didn't have a free and fair election. There was also an effort to get rid of the opposition party that won quite an overwhelming, the Progressive Party that won quite an overwhelming support from the people during the election. So in July 2019, the military coup, the junta, which was called the NCPO, National Council for Peace and Order, was transfer its power to the so-called elected government. But I would call that we are still under the junta-led government, even formally it is an elected government, because we still got this guy, General Prayut Chan-o-cha, as the Prime Minister. And although now there's more accountability and rule of law and democratic rule and democratic principle in place, which is different, of course, from the 5 years under the direct military rule, we cannot really say that we are out of the so-called authoritarian exercise of power, I would say. Why? And I think this shows even clearer during the last 2 years of the pandemic and the rise of the pro-democracy movement in the country. That's quick background, but I like to point out, first of all, that our experience of democracy and authoritarianism is always up and down. There's some key players here who keep coming back to the Thai democracy, the military, with some role of the monarchy here. And also we can see that the people keep struggling and fighting and demand for democracy. That's what happened in the last 90 years in Thailand. And this didn't happen just because the military figure won its power. But this could be continue and happen again and again just because the public many of the people in the public are also supportive of the military rule. If you recall, if you follow Thai politics, you may recall what happened in December 2013 until the coup in 2014. Many people demonstrate on the street, asking to indirectly for military intervention. Directly, movement. It was a movement against election, against democratic election, because they believe that those who should rule the country should not be the so-called dirty politician or corrupt politician, but should be the good people, which we believe that's the military. And I'd like to highlight this because I don't think that the military could rule the country alone, but they do that with the support of many people from the public. So when they staged the coup, people came out and thank you for doing that, for saving the country. And this sentiment still exists in today's world. In our everyday life, where people may think it's okay to have the good military instead of the elected politician who likely to be corrupt. That's the sentiment of many Thai. Okay. Oops. Yeah, people came out and gave flower to the military, to the soldier who staged the coup. This photo was from the coup in 2004. Right? The previous one, not the latest one. Okay, so that's Thailand. What happened under the 5 years under military rule? I'll just show some number here, which just to give you some idea. More than 1,300 people were summoned to report to the military or visited at that place. Almost 1,000 of them were summoned to have what they call attitude adjustment program, mostly inside the military camp. Some of them had to report themselves to the military for 1 day. Some of them had to stay for 7 days, nights, which is actually it was arbitrary detention. They were either interrogated or to adjust their attitudes towards the nation and towards the monarchy. 600 people were arrested. So many people were charged under the lèse-majesté law, which is the law about defamation of the king. 121 were charged with sedition law. Computer crime act, or gathering of more than 5 people. Many public events were intervened. I cannot remember when you here in Thailand, Maheshti, but if you were during the first year after the coup, not your batch, I think, our institute organized a public seminar from time to time, and the soldier in uniform attended our seminar to monitor what we talk about. Sometimes they visited a day early to ask us not to talk about something. So, and this never happened before the 2014 military coup. Worse, under the NCPO, the National Council of Peace and Order, under the junta rule, civilians were tried at military court. And this is a serious human rights violation because under the military court, you cannot have, sorry, that's my clock. You cannot have a fair trial, right? But they stopped that just before Thailand had to report itself to the UN human rights mechanism. Some people complain of being tortured. I haven't included here 6 Thai political exiles. No, now it's 7 Thai political exiles who fled the country after the coup to stay in neighboring countries will disappear. Another two were found dead in Mekong River at the border of Thai and Laos. So these were the situation of the authoritarian rule. It might sound not too bad when compared to like the situation in Myanmar, but the use of law, the use of legal and criminal procedures against the pro-democracy voice is one of the very important characteristics of how the authoritarian exercise its power. At the beginning of 2020, Thailand experienced the rise of the youth movement for democracy. And this is a photo from one of the early protests organized in Mahidol in our campus, Mahidol University. The sign here says, the sovereign power belongs to every Thai, which is a very powerful message in the Thai culture, in the Thai political culture, because we were never been taught that the power belongs to the people. And the last 2.5 years by now, we witnessed the growth of the pro-democracy movement. Many protests which question very root causes of Thai authoritarianism. Talk about human rights, talks about double standard of laws. And even the message here, we don't want to be slave, which means we want to be free and equal people in the Thai society. We question the violence against the racial protester in 2010. There were even some months during the pandemic where there was protest almost everywhere, every day around the country to demand for democracy. I highlight this because it also helps us to understand authoritarianism in Thailand. Because it questions the so-called good people concept that the military has been promoted all the way long and has been supported by the conservative. Here, this is the Democracy Monument, and it was taken in one of the protests, I think this year. It says the tyranny under the guise of the good people. I chose this photo because it also shows the very important political discourse that had been sustaining the Thai authoritarian rule, the so-called good people who can rule the country up to their will because they know best what should be delivered, what should be done for the people. But the protesters are saying that that's the tyranny, that they are actually just claim to be good people, but they are actually not. The protests also demand for the reform of the monarchy, which led to violent crackdown a couple of times against the protester. They demand for even no king. This photo was taken just before the police took away all this sign. And the sign here, the t-shirt here say, you cannot block the people's idea or people's opinion. This is in central downtown Bangkok in Siam Square, Ratchaprasong area. As a result of the people's rights for democracy, many people were prosecuted. Among them were youth, because as I mentioned earlier, most of these protests were led by the youth. Many individuals were prosecuted for violation of lèse majesté. Again, most of them were prosecuted for violation of public emergency. Remember, we were dealing the pandemic and public. Oops. Sorry. I don't know why it. Sorry. Zoom asked me to sign out. Let me try again. Oops. can you still hear me?
Yeah. We can still see your screen. Yeah.
Okay, because I cannot see my screen. Okay.
Yeah, it's
That's
still on the
strange.
18 July
I am on
2020.
Yes, okay. That's strange because it popped up and say I need to sign out. I will be quick. Yeah. So many people got arrested, got detained. Some of the key activists spent maybe almost half of their last 1 year in prison just because of their speech during the protest, nothing else. They were detained pre-trial. Also, the civil society, the people's fund to bail the activists out has spent more than, I think, 30, no, almost 60, more than $1 million as bail money in the last 2 years. Money went in and out, of course, but most of the money were kept in the judicial process. So that's the scale of how the voices were suppressed in the last 2 years under the name of national health control, the public health measure. Okay. So these are like the situation and the implication of the authoritarian rule and its implication on human rights in Thailand. Before what happened, this photo also, I think it show very clearly what the situation here. It may seem like the protesters were facing the security forces. But if you notice those yellow t-shirts behind, they were like plainclothes officer, I believe. But of course, if they walk around the protest, you would never know whether they were the security forces. But they show themselves by backing up the armed security force when they confronted with the protester. And I think this shows us the nature of the authoritarian rule in the country. Again, back to the point I made earlier, it is not only about the military, the monarchy, or the elite that try to control the people or limits the rights of the people, but it's also the support from the public, the belief that this the elite rule should be the model to rule the country. And there are so many other political culture issues that has been brought up and addressed and challenged by the youth-led pro-democracy movement in the last 2 years. I think I will just end here and we can talk more about this maybe after Bayu's presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ajahn Ben. It's so eye-opening. It's so interesting. I just know the support from public is one of the interesting and important point to see how the authoritarianism can happening in Thailand for so long. And then, but before we talk more about what happened in Thailand, I think we will hear presentation from Mas Bayu first. So if you guys have any question, you can write down in the chat box on keep it for a while, and then you can raise your hand after our second presentation. Yeah. Okay. So now, Mas Bayu, the time is yours. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mahesti. Thank you very much, Ben. First of all, I'm in the public space. I'm sorry if there's a background noise. This is okay. Is the sound is okay? I'm just checking.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Today, I would like to present about what I call, it is very interesting to see how Ben present about the overview of the Thailand's democracy. But in my in my presentation today, I would like to highlight what has happened during the Jokowi administration or Jokowi Dodo administration from 2014 to 2024. And then especially focusing on how this regime has been transformed from what we call as the new hope of democracy into what we call now as the little Suharto, returning to the authoritarian era during the Suharto. So for the presentation will be consist of a few stages. The first one, I would like to talk a little bit about the conceptual framework of what we call as the authoritarian and semi-authoritarian regime. And then we would like to see, I would like to present about the Indonesian, what we call now the scholars labeled Indonesia as the Indonesian declining democracy. And then I would briefly outline what Jokowi has done in the first term, 2014 and 2019, and then how he then used the pandemic, especially during the COVID-19, as the exercise of authoritarianism. I would like to discuss whether this kind of case is the authoritarian necessity, whether there is a democracy versus effective government, which way to choose, and then at the end, we would like to see whether it is some of achievement or obstacles in the upcoming of the COVID-19 cases, the vaccination and the Indonesian economy, and I would like to conclude with some conclusion. So this is my outline. First of all, there's a classic book on the authoritarian regime by Chuandis, who defined authoritarian regime as the political system which limited, not responsible political pluralism, and then which a leader or occasionally a small group exercises power within formally ill-defined limit, but actually quite predictable one. So in Lin's theory, the authoritarian regime sits between what he called as the between the totalitarianism and the democracy. So there lies between this. And later scholars then describe what it's called as semi-authoritarianism. One of the newest book by Larry Diamond, Platter, and Wolfram in 2016, for instance, argued that there is a growing tension of authoritarianism in all over the world, especially supported by these scholars called as the Big Five of authoritarianism: China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. So the globalization and the IT technology has made the authoritarian government threaten democracies with more coordinated and more decisive action. So what happened in China, in Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela amplified in other countries. So this is the global trend of the rising of authoritarianism around the world. The other scholars, Olcott and Ottaway, for instance, in 1999 discussed about what they call as the semi-authoritarian regime. So semi-authoritarian regime is regimes that contain elements of both democratic and authoritarian system. And I argue that Indonesian cases, after the people power in 1998 that toppled Suharto, is fit perfectly in this definition. So we have what we call as element of democracy. We have competitive, quite free and fair competitive election. We have a free press. We have the more than one political party. There is no domination in political party. The votes of the people quite differs to at least 9 parties sitting in the parliament. We have the institutional, the balance of the executive, judiciary, and legislative. So we have quite working, it's not perfectly working, but it's quite a working judiciary system. So all of the democratic institution has been placed in Indonesia However, this kind of institution has been corrupted by the characters of the authoritarian regime. So if we look at this diagram, for instance, uh, there is a degree of 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 the way in which the scholars make the regime category from close authoritarianism to liberal democracy. So between these two pendulum, there is a close authoritarian, hegemonic electoral authoritarian, competitive authoritarian, electoral democracy, and at the far end is the liberal democracy. And I think Indonesia is perfectly sits on what we call as the semi-authoritarian regime. So based on Olcott and Ottaway, authoritarian regime, semi-authoritarian regime is divided into three categories. The first one is dynamic regimes, which allow incremental democratic change. So in short, there's a big hope that this country will then turn again into democratic countries. And then the second one in the middle is the equilibrium regime, where it's require profound change to become democratic. And the last one is regimes in decay, in which that is unlikely to be democratized. So I think if we try to divide it again, the level of democracy in Indonesia, currently it sits between the semi-authoritarian regime and especially the dynamic regime with, in my opinion, and this is not only my opinion, this is my hope as well, that we will return to what the period in early 1998, in early 2000, where we consolidating democracy with very few decay of the very few influence of the authoritarianism. So if we look at the period of Indonesian democratization for the last 20 years, for instance, based on the administration, we can divide it at least into three levels. First of all, there is a democratic consolidation, which happened between 1998 to 2004, 2005, where at this level, after the People's Power in 1998, there is an establishment of a new democratic system. We have constitutional court. We have restructured our legislative system. All of them are elected, and we have for the first time the direct presidential election in 2004, and also the local direct election for all mayors, districts, district regions, and also governor in all over Indonesia. So between this period, we consolidate what our value, our goals in the 1998 movement. However, then scholars during the SBY or Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono administration, Indonesia experienced what it called as the stagnation of democracy. So this democracy is stagnated. There is a comeback of the oligarchy into Indonesian politics. The political party has been controlled by those who have a lot of money, and this is the topics that we discussed, I think, 2 weeks ago. So so in this period, there is a comeback of the non-democratic elite, non-democratic movement to try to recapture the democratic system that we already consolidated before 2005. And under the Jokowi administration, many scholars argue that Indonesia is now going back to what they call as democratic declining, the democratic backlash, the democratic deconsolidation, and there is a numerous cases where there is the freedom of speech has been limited by the introduction of the electronic law, which then prevent people to talk freely using the social media and sort of the things, and people and then reported each other because using this kind of law. So there's a very serious backlash in Indonesian democracy during the Jokowi administration. If we look at the score that has been provided by the Freedom House, it clearly sees that Indonesia's democratic level has been declining very significantly in the last 5 years. We previously have the status of partly a free, the only free country in Southeast Asia, I think, before 2014, and then now we are trapped again in the partly free, and the trend is seriously declining from 65 to 61 in 2020. This is, I think, this is the serious warning that the authoritarian regime might be come back. In 2014, the Time magazine at that time labeled Jokowi as a new hope. So at that time, there is a New Hope is a title of I think the Star Wars. I think at that time there was a Star Wars movie, very happening at that time, very viral at that time, and the Time magazine then labeled Jokowi as a new hope. At that time, Jokowi's rival is Prabowo Subianto, a general who has history of human rights violation during the students' movement in 1996 to 1998, and he was then sacked from the military because of this case of the killing. He then accused of been killing some of the students activists at that time. So in 2014, we see there is a Jokowi in one state, the symbol of hope, symbol of democracy after long period of stagnation, and Prabowo on the other hand as the symbol of the old order, the authoritarian regime, who is the ex-son-in-law of Suharto, and all of this kind of labeling make Jokowi a new hope. However, few years later, in 2002, 7 years later, the Indonesian law, the Indonesian Coalition of Law, Yayasan Lembaga Bantuan Hukum Indonesia, and then label Jokowi with this picture on Twitter, which is viral very exponentially at that time, depict Jokowi as a little Suharto. So Suharto on one side, and this is the official portrait of the Indonesian president. So the left is the official portrait of Suharto, the last period of Suharto, and the right one is the official portrait of President Jokowi's second term. So how come the Jokowi, who's the first one, become the new hope of the Indonesian democracy and then turn into little Suharto? I would like to use the case of COVID-19 as how to measure whether this is the necessary authoritarianism to prevent the Indonesian citizen from COVID-19 pandemic. ISIAS, Southeast Asian Affairs journals, produce a yearly analysis of Indonesian democracy. So in 2016, for instance, Dirk Tomsa wrote an article about the Jokowi consolidated power. In 2017, Priyambudi Sulistianto, for instance, wrote about Jokowi's supremacy and his next political battles. So if I would like to review very shortly about the 5 years of Jokowi first term as the precondition of the returning of the semi-authoritarian government, we can see that in the first years of Jokowi, there's a shaky coalition. Everyone's, this is the new party coming to power, and the priority of Jokowi administration to get rid of all of this SBY, the previous president people inside the palace. For instance, there is check and balances between all of the political powers at that time. So it's quite a shaky coalition. And then in 2016, Jokowi start to become very confident with his power. He tried to consolidate power very effectively at that time in 2016. However, 2016, the end of the 2016 marked the biggest protest in Indonesian history, where the Jakarta governor, Basuki Cahayapurnama or Ahok, become the suspect of blasphemy and then later sentenced for a year in prison. So it's created tension in the country where there is a massive political unrest at that time. In 2017, there is no choice for Jokowi rather than to try to accommodate all political power, especially from the Islamic side. So Jokowi start to get close to Nahdlatul Ulama, the biggest Islamic organization in countries, and then start to deliver some of this revenue to this organization by building the pesantren, the boarding house for the traditional Islamic schools, and then start to build to facilitate the economy of this Islamic boarding school owned by the Nahdlatul Ulama, and also start to create the economy, give the funding for the local economy to be grow. And not only that, the Jokowi also started to help to new building for all of this pesantren. In 2018, what consolidated the power has been on his own reach. It's called as the political supremacy at that time. It's very strong, very confident. All the political parties follow what he wants to do, even though he himself doesn't control any political party at that time, but he can consolidate all the power under his hand. And then in 2019, the two rivals again in the president election in 2019, and quite shockingly that after a long period of divide in Indonesian society, after Jokowi winning quite a significant margin from Prabowo, he then welcoming Prabowo into his cabinet, becoming his Ministry of Defense. So with all of this politics now, all of the candidate of the president, both Prabowo and also his former vice president nominee Sandiaga Uno, is all joined the Jokowi's cabinet, creating the very strong presidentialism, not only on the executive level, but also on the legislative level, where Jokowi controls around 78% of the seats in the parliament under his coalition by giving the ministerial position to political parties. So the second term of Jokowi, it seems that he's quite confident, and then the COVID hits, and what he did, what he has done in the last 2 years is very interesting to see whether he exercised the more democratic kind of leadership or the more authoritarian style of leadership. I use this COVID-19 case as what the government argue as the authoritarian necessity. So this is the pictures. This is the picture of one of the Indonesian rock star get fascinated in the police headquarters in Jakarta. This is quite interesting because not many countries in the world has used the police and also the military to be integrated in the vaccination system. And in fact, the vaccination done by the police and the military is quite successful. This is quite amazing because normally the government from central to local government and also from to provincial and also to local government done the vaccination. However, Jokowi at that time he argued, especially the government argued that there's no ineffective government at the local level, and this is the test whether this is the case of crisis will be the democratic or authoritarianism kind of government. So at that time, the Jokowi, with his own consolidated power, try to choose between, first of all, controlling the pandemic or creating the effective democratic. All of these choices has causes. And then Jokowi, I think, is chose to controlling the pandemic and abandoning a little bit some effect of effective democracy. This is also the story where there is a failure. They argue that there is a failure of the democratic civilian government. So the government at the local and provincial level is not effectively tackling the crisis. Some of the local leaders, some of the regions, some of the mayors neglected the seriousness of the COVID-19 and did not follows the instruction from the central government. This is the classic kind of democratic country where there is a high level of decentralization, where the central government is not only the one who has control of all these political affairs, but also the authority is also given to the provincial and the local government. So there's a problem, of course, within the coordination in the central government. There is a problem between central and regional governments, and especially more importantly, there is a struggles to accommodate what the political party interests, not only at the national level but also at the local level. Governors, mayors, and regions who come from different party or different party coalition with the president likely not to follow order from the central government, and this has become the serious case, the serious issue. So it seems that following the central government and successing the vaccination program, for instance, will not increase his level of popularity among his followers, but on the contrary, it might backlash for his electoral popularity. So there is a lot of stories there that the mayor and also the regent in some areas in Indonesia is not following the order from the central government. The vaccines became expired in a lot of areas because the local government cannot provide the efficient way to vaccinate the people. And in this case, there is no other way for Jokowi, in his own opinion, rather than to introduce military and the police in the vaccination process. If we look at the case, from the total case in the world, Indonesia come, I think, number 7 with 6 million cases from its 279 million population, and Thailand came 9. I think this is quite a big number in Asia. Sorry, this is in Asia, not the world. This is in Asia. So the cases in Asia, which I download today, is quite significant that Indonesia is ranked number 7. From total daily cases, we can see the graph, which is quite big. We have the 3 waves, especially 2 big waves from Delta in August 2021 and Omicron in 2022. It's actually quite similar with the case in Thailand, where Thailand also experienced 2 waves of pandemic, but the low level. Indonesia is better in the term of daily cases now, and also in late 2021. However, it's very important to note that the numbers of testing in Indonesia is quite low compared to Thailand. If we see whether the semi-authoritarian effective in in tackling the pandemic, we can see that the share of people vaccinated against the COVID-19 dated 8 June 2022, where Singapore is the highest in Southeast Asia with 92% of the population has been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, while Thailand, the second one is Vietnam with 86%, the third one is Thailand with 81%, Indonesia came the fourth with 73%, the Philippines 67%, and the world is 66%. So we can say that the numbers of vaccination, the full vaccination in some of the Southeast Asia countries is actually well beyond the world vaccination rate. There is what they call as the antibody testing with the survey of COVID-19 antibody in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta, in Java. That shows that 99 out of 100 people in Indonesia have COVID-19 antibodies. So this is quite a good. We can say that the government is quite effective in tackling the pandemic. The last one that we would see the data if whether the semi-authoritarian regime is quite effective in tackling the pandemic. We can see from the economic growth in some of the Southeast Asia countries, and it's quite well that the Indonesian in 2021 is 4-point-something%, is quite good, and also in 2020 we experienced a recession, but it's not as bad as other countries, especially in the Philippines. The Thailand, for instance, which normally much more resilient than Indonesia, have more than 5% of recession in 2020 and just above 2% in 2000, just above 2000% GDP growth in 2021. Of course, Vietnam is much more resilient never experienced recession because of very effective government intervention of the pandemic. So to conclude, I think it's just quite hard to, if we only look at the if we look at the case in COVID-19, it's just not as easy as we can quite easily blame that the authoritarian regime is not effective, because if we use comparative perspective on how the democratic level and how effective governance to tackle the crisis, we can see that Indonesia is, well, it's not that bad. It's just quite better than other counterpart in Southeast Asia and even the world. So in early democracy like Indonesia, where the civilian institution is consolidating, the government has no choice rather than to implement more authoritarian style of government. There's a lot of critique about the violation of human rights. There's a lot of critique where the human rights activists being hacked, their social media being hacked, and their tweet being reported and so forth. But the government, the cause is that the government must curtail freedom of expression to prevent hoax, include military and the police in disciplining, to include military and the police to disciplining citizens and to be important part of the vaccination process. However, this is very big. However, the Jokowi administration seems to enjoy the use of police to curb critics and democratic protests even after the pandemic is slowing down. So in the last few weeks, in the last few months, for instance, we can see that the level of authoritarianism is not declining compared to the cases of the COVID-19. So it seems that the government very enjoy the level of authoritarianism without the very effective and very coordinated critique toward the government. And there is a very strong indication that Indonesia, unfortunately, might change from the dynamic semi-institution to regime in decay, which we should prevent altogether. I think that is my presentation today. I'm really welcome to the question if there is any. Thank you very much, Mas.
Okay, thank you very much, Mas Bayu. It's so interesting how the current government it's more and more to be authoritarianism, and they are really enjoy in controlling the citizen, and as well as ensuring that the government is effective. Okay, so I think we can see some kind of the similarities between Thailand and Indonesia during the pandemic. There is a increasing authoritarianism both in Indonesia and in Thailand, and both of the countries are used in the name of public health, and so they try to repress freedom of expression as well as freedom of how to get more educated in vaccination, and as well as an information about the total number and how many people who got affected and etc. Okay, okay, we will start the next session. It's about Q&A session. So if you guys have any question, both for Ajahn Ben or Mas Bayu, please you can raise your hand or write down the question in the chat box. I think, yeah. This discussion is also live streaming in our YouTube channel. So I think for Rosie, if you want to see or listening again the discussion, you can go to our YouTube channel and you can listening again and see the presentation. Okay. If there's no one people asking, I'll ask to Ajahn Ben. So yeah, Ajahn, you were explain about at the past the military or the good people lead the country, but then in the I think start from 2020 we see there is I think it's an interesting transformation because the youth were the majority who did the protest and demonstration in 2020. I'm curious why are in Thailand in the current years? Yeah.
Sorry, why?
Could
what?
you please explain more?
Sorry, the last part I missed the last part.
Yeah. Can you explain more the reason why the youth movement in Thailand is getting stronger in the last 2 years? Because in the big protest in 2022, we see a lot of young generation join the demonstration. Yeah.
Thank you, Maheshti. And actually, that's part of my current research also, which is ongoing about the youth politics during the pandemic. I think what happened in what we saw, the eruption of the youth protests in early 2020 was mainly the result of the feeling that the youth feel that their voices are not heard. We had an election in 2019, and as I mentioned, the new, very progressive political party was formed, and they got support. They called Future Forward Party, and it got supported by the youth. Many youth voted for the first time because remember we were under military rule since 2014. So the election in 2019 was there were many first-time voters who support Future Forward Party. But in early 2020, I think, if I recall correctly, it was in February, the Constitution Court dissolved this political party on the logic that it sounds very weird, like the leaders of the political party own a media company, which is illegal in Thailand if you want to run a political party and to be in political position. But actually he's like, and then also he lent some money to his own political party, and so his party was dissolved. I think many youth feel that their voices are dismissed, and that's why they want to voice out their demand. And also another trigger that led to the growth of the movement was actually happened in July, July or late May of 2020 also, when a Thai political exile, so a young man was disappeared from his home and abducted from his home in Cambodia. I think that's another trigger where the youth feel that there's something wrong in the system, and then you have to listen to us. So they came out, they organized, protest, they questioned very important issues, but it kind of fade out from like last year, at the end of last year until now, partly probably because many of the key leaders got arrested, got charges, as I presented to you earlier. Almost 2,000 people were prosecuted for their involvement in the political movement. Many got jailed, and it cost a lot of time and money to be in this legal battle with the Thai state. And therefore, we haven't seen much protest in the last couple of months, but I'm aware that the youth are still mobilizing, organizing their own activities in different form, and maybe not in like mass demonstration. HT, you are frozen.
ST, I think you are frozen. ST. ST.
And also muted.
Yes.
Okay,
but
thank you. Know that actually the youth are. Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello.
Oh yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Now it's okay.
I guess now, yeah.
I'm sorry, I have bad connection. Okay, thank you for the explanation, Ajahn. It's good to know that actually the youth are still organizing some movement, and I can't wait to see what's next in Thailand. So I get a question from Ajahn. Also, okay, there is someone asking. Okay, so we go to Sauyan first, and then I will read the questions for both Mas Bayu and Ben. So Sauyan, am I say correctly? Hey.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. It was really interesting. My name is Soyanai. I'm from Mahidol University. And my question for Ajahn Ben, because I'm also studying about social movement in Myanmar, and the movement transformed to armed resistance now, and it's quite huge movement. And like also in Thailand context, Ajahn Ben also have presented that there's a series of social movement in Thailand too. When we look at the movement, the majority are youth, and they pay high cost despite the human rights violations. And Ajahn Ben, for the context of Thailand, what is the position and the role of social movement for democratizing Thailand, and what is the key driving force of democratizing Thailand? even though there's a state authoritarianism in Thailand, but there's a lot of positive transformation in Thailand, so that yeah, what is the key driving force for democratizing Thailand, and how is the role of the movement, social movement? Thank you.
Should I answer now, or we get a few more questions?
Okay, thank you, Saoyan. Nine, sorry. I think you can just answer directly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Soyoung Nai, for your question. The key driving force of democratization in Thailand. I think we share the experiences of Indonesia and the Philippines, where the mass movement led to some the people's power, led to some of the democratic change in the past. As I mentioned, in Thailand, we had experienced at least four key mass protests for democracy in 73, 76, 1992, and then again in 2010. And we witnessed the growth of civil society and NGOs, especially in the 1990s and the 2000s. And I would say the work of the social movement are the key, and civil society are the key driving forces for democracy. And the youth movement is part of that. But we also have to take note that many of the civil society in Thailand are not for democracy. And here I'm not only talking about the conservative forces, but also even like the NGOs, those who may work for so-called social justice or development issues. We realize in the last decades of political conflict that those civil society organizations are not that democratic as we assume or expect them to be. They turn to be quite conservative in terms of their political position. So we may not have one key driving force, but we have seen the growth of the people voices, people concerned who come out and protest, make demands for change. And their role is not just only organize or mobilize mass demonstration, which is important, of course. But for me, I am more interested in the way they change the political narratives and the political discourse in the country. As I mentioned, for the Thai culture, we are not equal. Just to say that we are all equal is a very, very, very strong message. And I think that's what many youth and the pro-democracy movement are now doing. And the discourse they brought out in the last 2 years totally changed the political landscape in Thailand. They talk about the issue that never been discussed before. They even just like to call the name of the king without a very, very long name. That's already a very powerful message, and that they do that. So it may not lead to like sudden change and the military figure are still there, but I believe that this kind of cultural change are going on and very, very strong. I'm not sure if I answer your question, Sonia.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn. Slow but sure, I think the democratization in Thailand is getting better. Okay, so Saoyan, if you still have further question, I think we can discuss later, or you can meet Ajahn Ben directly at IHRP. Okay, so I got a question for Mas Bayu. So someone is asking, as we know that the background of Jokowi is civilian. I mean, he is not a military or police, yet he can utilize the police and the military in the pandemic era effectively. Why do you think so? Why or I don't know how Jokowi can use the police and military effectively? Do you have any arguments? Okay. Thank you.
I think it's not an easy question to answer, but I think the way in which Jokowi control the military is by using the positions, by swapping some of position both in the military and also in the police to to quite strategic positions. For instance, Jokowi chose to choose the one of the military general as the Ministry of the Health at that time, even though it's not quite working quite effectively. And then he chose some of his military colleagues as the high echelon level in the Ministry of Health. So Jokowi also choose, for instance, the ex-military as the Ministry of Religious Affairs. These two positions is very strategic during the pandemic. So the Ministry of the Religious Affairs try to control the mind of the people, and while the Ministry of Health try to tackle the problem of the COVID-19 virus. So I think there's also other positions that normally is not held by the military, it's now given to the military. One of the important case now is that there is a military position, there is a military personnel holding the regent position outside Java, and that's never happened before. So in preparation of the 2024 elections, some of the mayors and also the regents is directly chosen by the central government, following the recommendation from the governor. And in one case that the central government choose to nominate an active military general to become the regents in one of the districts outside Java. I think that's never been the case. So I think the way in which Jokowi tried to control power is by giving some strategic position to the military, increasing their budget. There's a significant increase in budget from the Ministry of Defense. So that's a way. In that way, Jokowi can control the military and also the police. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Bayu. So actually, there is an emerging composition between civilian and military in Indonesian government. Yeah. So okay. So there is a question from Ajahn Mike. Hi, Ajahn Mike Hayes. Okay, I will read the question. I think this question is for Ajahn Ben. This is so funny. Actually, Ajahn Mike, you can just say asking the Ajahn Ben directly at the office. But yeah, okay, thank you. The Thai government legalized marijuana yesterday. How can that be explained given it was done by a conservative authoritarian government? Will Indonesia be next? Wow, marijuana, it's so interesting. Okay, so the question is for both of you. So please.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I forgot to mention that although we say that there are authoritarian regime, but there has been some progressive achievement in concrete achievement with the state also. I think we need to, I don't know the real politics behind this. And actually yesterday, the parliament also passed the the local spirit, the local alcohol rule that allows the people to distill their own alcohol, which we consider that that's a progressive because so far it has been monopolized by the large company only. So I think, do we say that, I think first of all, for me, this is not the issue that would undermine the so-called national security. It's not, it doesn't pose any threat to the power of the authorities. Partly the politician who led this, who advocate for this policy is also has some power within the government. But what's interesting is that the government issue a law, passed the law without any preparation. Then one day, marijuana is free to use in Thailand. And now people are talking about, do we know how to use it properly? Would there be any danger if we don't know how to use it? And so on and so on. Because I think that shows another aspect of authoritarian rule where you do anything. One day you issue a law. You don't need to think about accountability. You don't need to think about input from the people and so on and so on. Will Indonesia be next? I leave it to Mas Bayu.
Thank you very much, Mike and Ben. It's clearly I don't think so that Indonesia is going to legalize marijuana soon. I think we're very strict on the law on drugs, and marijuana is one of the drugs that is not prohibited circulated in the Indonesian society. So anything that is I don't know, because marijuana is quite different with other drugs. Well, other drugs have impact. This is what I read. Marijuana has no effect actually on the body, even not for the long term. So just make you happy and make you fly, thinking about other things rather than your own problem you are currently facing, something like that. But I don't think that Indonesia is going to legalize marijuana anytime soon. I think.
Okay, thank you, Ajahn Ben and Mas Bayu, for your response. We still have 5 more minutes, and I have one more question for Mas Bayu from YouTube. So there's a question: how is the role of the CSO in Indonesia to fight the rising of authoritarianism? Are they accepting it peacefully, or is there any fight back? Or do you think in the future Indonesia will be like Thailand, where there will be a lot of protests and demonstration happen? Yeah, I think our last question, and one more question for us.
It's quite interesting that the civil society in Indonesia is now quite quiet rather than before. There is some indication in there. So one of the way in which the Jokowi try to buy, quote unquote, buy these activists, including academia, is that by giving the position of in the state-owned enterprise for them. So that's one case. So that's a very strong indication that Jokowi supporters has been given quite strategic position in the state-owned enterprise. So there is, of course, there is quite significant challenge from the civil society. For instance, there is a case where this is actually just a normal podcast and only few hundred, maybe few thousand people watching in the private channel of one of the human rights activists in Indonesia, talking about the potential mining owned by the one of the strongest minister, Luhut Panjaitan, in Papua. And then just because of this kind of YouTube videos, the podcast videos, and then now those two of them, both are the human rights activists, become the suspect of the become suspect by the police because of the ministry, the Luhut Panjaitan, the ministry of the coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Infestation doesn't feel that his integrity is being threatened. So the case is still going on and create a lot of attention between the society. But other than that, it seems that there is no significant or coordinated response or critics to the government currently. So the academia has been bribed, most of them, and then there is no significant critics from the civil society because there is a very strong, for instance, a few months ago, there is a tendency for Jokowi to change the constitution for the third period. So in 2014, Jokowi can challenge the other candidate to become the president again. So there is an indication at that time that strong debate about the Jokowi third term. So Jokowi is going to be end in 2024, and then it's created a lot of public debate, both the supporters and also the defenders of democracy. And it's quite interesting to see how these two camps using their own ideology and their own arguments to say no or yes for the third term for Jokowi. And it's all ended not by the winning of this proponent of democracy, but because Jokowi said so that I don't want to be nominated again as president. So it clearly shows that even though the debate of the third term of Jokowi coming from inside the government, is not the civil society who finish and who wins the debate of the third term, but the Jokowi himself who stopped this kind of debate. And it clearly shows that he has a very strong position and using this kind of authoritarianism legitimacy to stop this kind of debate. So yeah, unfortunately, it's quite different from a previous era where now the civil society is hard and try to support and lost a lot of fundings from inside and outside the country. So I think now is very hard time for the civil society to try to be critical to the government at that time, at the current time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mas Bayu. I know I said that it was the last question, but there is one more question for Mas Bayu, and it's also related about Lord Luhut, one of the people that you have mentioned before. So Adolf asked that as we know in Indonesia now, behind Jokowi, we have Luhut Panjaitan, the Lord. He has many roles to controlling the public policy. Could you explain to us how it can be happen, especially if the roles were taken others elites? Does it another model of authoritarianism? Okay, I promise this is the last one.
Well, this is very interesting question, Adolf. First of all, I would like to say that Jokowi and Luhut Panjaitan, this is one of the strongest minister in Indonesia. Everyone say that the level of Luhut Panjaitan is like the prime minister, because he then received the task for Jokowi for almost everything, from vaccination, for lockdown, the partial lockdown, for investment, for food and security, for electric vehicle, everything. So this is actually not part of his job. The last time he was given the order for Jokowi to lower down the price of the cooking oil. So this is actually not his job, because it's clearly the job of the Ministry of Trade and Ministry of Agriculture, but Luhut is given the authority to deal with the rising price of the cooking oil. So Luhut and Jokowi knows about a few years from the business because they have the big business in partner. Jokowi was the furniture exporter at that time, and they now Luhut, and then they create the company to export the furniture to overseas, and then from this kind of friendship, and then develop into in the political arena. So is that kind of new authoritarianism? This is very interesting question. I can say yes and no. Yes, in the term that Jokowi is not taking all of this authoritarianism policy on himself, so he put away on Luhut. So if there is something wrong, Luhut will be blamed by the society, something like that. So Jokowi is still have the good reputation, something like that. So, and it seems that Luhut also enjoying this kind of privilege, enjoying this kind of authority from Jokowi. So this is a kind of interesting authoritarianism models that hasn't been discussed by scholars in the term of presidentialism cabinet. However, I would mention here that it is quite a question what happened after Jokowi ended in 2024. So will Luhut still be in charge? Because if the government change and the PDIP is not winning the election and PDIP's candidate is not winning the election, there is a possibility that the new president with the new party will try to clean up all of these ministry, and maybe Luhut will be the suspect of all of this because he's very powerful. He make everyone happy in the sometimes and then hate him in the other time. So it's kind of it's quite a dangerous position that Luhut is taking now, and he is not a president, so it's easily to be blamed if there is something wrong happen and Jokowi is still keeping his charisma intact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mas Bayu. It's so interesting analysis. Okay. The last one, as a closing statement, for Ajahn Ben and Mas Bayu, what do you think about the authoritarian regime in the future for Thailand and Indonesia? I think could you please give her like a short or and also a brief for a closing statement for our discussion today. I hope the question is not too hard.
Okay, can I answer first?
Yes, please.
I think the way in which Indonesia might be safe, quote unquote, from the authoritarian dictatorship is that we have a regular election. So that is very important that we can imagine that we have a new president in 2024. So even though there is a strong tendency that Jokowi is enjoying the level of authoritarianism that he has exercised during the pandemics, people can hope that there will be a new president with a new set of cabinet, with the new set of policies. So this may stop the authoritarianism. That's why there's the discussion or the debate about the third term of Jokowi presidency is quite fierce, because this is the only way that we can defend our democratic life, that we can hope we have a new president in 2024. So quote unquote, Indonesia is safe by the regular election that we have done since 2004.
Nice. Okay.
Thank you. Then I can still part of Mas Bayu's answer. We have to make the Thai people believe in election first. That election is the only game in town. That when we have a regular election, that's the way that we could have an accountable and responsible government. I think what's the future? I'm not sure. I think it's become a trend around the world where the elites or those who are in power, they are feeling that they are under threatened by economic situation, by the rise, by the increased number of migrants, by the rise of the lower class in the society who make more demands in the society. I think this is a trend around the world. We just need to keep the stronghold of democracy, either in the political system, election, or in the education system, like what we are doing now. And I see that Fila is promoting the degree. That's part of this effort to build the trust in and the values of human rights and democracy in our culture. I believe in the power of the people, but we need to work with the people to believe in human rights and democracy also.
Thank you. It was quotable, Ajahn. We believe in the power of the people. So, okay. So from both of your explanation, we see that the general election and the belief, the people power are the key in democratization in Thailand and Indonesia. And thank you very much once again for your explanation and for the very interesting discussion. And also thank you for everyone who attend the discussion. Also, Ajahn Klaus, hi. Don't forget that we will have another discussion next week, which will talk about Myanmar in Indonesian case. So hope you can join our next discussion. And once again, thank you very much and see you. I hope we can meet in person soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you,
Bye.
Hesti.
Thank you. Thank you, Hesti. Thank you, Mas Bayu.
Yeah.
Record.